Okay, so today is it's a Monday, I think. Um, a Monday in early May. I think it's May 4th or 5th or something like that. The Met Gala is like playing on screen. They're about just about to start. I think it's the red carpet before coming in. I have it on mute. Um, so prior to this, I was watching. I don't know. I was watching. I think his name's Steven and Mark Zuckerberg, and they were discussing it was like a really nice interview. And then towards the end, they started talking about things like the Theo Von guy was like probing Mark Zuckerberg, and he was trying to find out how things like how technology can help us like improve life expectancy, and if I think the question was like, do you think you're going to live forever? Wild stuff like that. So I started thinking about it too. And to be honest, I don't have this is going to be, I don't want to confess something negative, but this is going to be very incoherent. It might be very incoherent because me too, I'm just going to talk about all the things that the Holy Spirit has told me. A lot of it doesn't make sense to me too. I don't understand. Right. So when I was in Nashville, right, I think I was going from Nashville to Miami. So I spent the night at the airport. So I was sitting down at the airport. I'm not sure if I made a recording about it. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I was just sitting down, yeah. And then the Holy Spirit was talking to me about what he was like, what do I think consciousness is? And I was like, I don't know. All I know is it is. I don't know. Right? This girl is actually fine. Sorry. I think her name is Anta Shafer or something. Okay, sorry. What consciousness? What consciousness is? And I was like, I don't know what consciousness is, right? And it's telling me about how okay, let me just start it like this. Let's say there's like a pyramid of in biology there's like a pyramid of something called the pyramid of energy, right? And there are some organisms on top of that pyramid, and then there are all these lower level organisms at the bottom of the pyramid, right? Okay, so we could also do something called the pyramid of intelligence, right? Where you rank the most intelligent beings on Earth will be on top of that pyramid, right? Which will be the apex intelligent beings, and then at the bottom of that pyramid you have the least intelligent beings, right? So what those people was telling me was that if we created a pyramid like that, right, what I would find is that all the beings at the top of the pyramid, which would be the most intelligent beings on Earth, right? Animals on Earth, right? So that will include man, of course. Clap for yourself. Man, human beings essentially. Elephants, quite intelligent too. Octopuses, the whole nine, right? The top, the creme de la creme of Earth, of Earth intelligentsia, essentially. What I'll find is that all those beings there, they all have one thing in common, right? They all have the same amount of roughly about the same amount of water content, right? So human beings are 75% water, and elephants are around that between 70, I think 80 something percent. All these animals that are very intelligent, you see that all of them that are on top of that pyramid, they have about the same percentage of water, right? And if you keep going down that pyramid like that, you just discover that essentially intelligence scales with water. That was what that whole thing was about. How intelligence and consciousness scales with water, and then you get down to things that have zero intelligence and zero consciousness, and you also find that those things have zero water. Classic example would be stone. A stone has no intelligence, has no awareness. There's no intelligent stone anywhere. There's no conscious stone anywhere. And, well, stone also doesn't have any water. That's why it's a stone, right? And then you would, again, start thinking about things that are very intelligent. And then the more intelligent that thing gets, the more, for some very weird reason, the more water that thing would have, right? So there's this correlation between consciousness and water, right? Okay, pause. But this is not like a conversation about consciousness and water, right? This is a conversation about improving life expectancy, right? Of like human beings generally. So if you read the Bible, yeah, according to like Bible, like according to theology, right? The oldest person that ever lived, I think his name is Methuselah. And then before the Methuselah guy, right, there are all these guys that lived before him, and all of them, they were just like clocking 400 years old, 500 years old, 600 years old, as if it was nothing, right? And then all of a sudden the Bible was like, God was like, there's this passage in the Bible where God was like, my spirit will no longer contend with man. From now on, you'll not do more than 120 years. And everybody was like, okay, how are you going to do that? And then boom, there was like a flood, right? There was like the flood of Noah, right? And then after the flood of Noah, surprise, surprise, everybody just stopped. Like life expectancy just dropped, right? Immediately after that flood. And you just started seeing everybody living below like life expectancy just dropped essentially. We just became this like species that was doing like 60, 70, 80 years, 90 years. And if people that even managed to get to like 100, 120, when you see them, you'll be like, you know, they'll be so haggard, so like, you'll be like, hey bro, just die, you know. Right. So essentially, the thing that separates the Methuselahs of this world from us, yeah, was essentially just the flood, right? This is Kaepernick. Okay, sorry, it was just the flood, right? So I'm watching the Met Gala, so my brain is like switching between the two. So it was just the flood, right? So essentially, it was water again, right? It is water that kind of like is the water that was tampered with essentially that kind of like dropped our life expectancy. Technically, when you look at it, if you are going to believe the Bible and you're going to go by the whole flood myth, right? Okay, cool. So on one hand, right, you see that there's a correlation between intelligence and consciousness and water, right? And then on the other hand, now, according to the whole moral lesson of the whole Noah flood story is that life expectancy somehow too is tied to like water, right? Okay, cool. So two things here. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's now do the third one, which is like consciousness and transfer of consciousness, possession essentially, which essentially what consciousness is. Consciousness is like a transfer of consciousness, right? Because if you want to talk about life expectancy, it essentially doesn't make sense to do life. If you're going to live for like 100, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, 500 years, it doesn't make sense, to be honest, to live 500 years in one body. Do you understand? It doesn't just make any sense, right? You probably want to like switch bodies at some point. Do you understand? To just like spice things up a little bit. And you see a little bit of that with like, you see a little bit of that with like people like Jesus, you know. Immediately after Jesus was like, after he resurrected, right? He appeared to his disciples and, you know, they didn't even know it was him. He was like talking to them. Eventually they figured out, okay, this must be Jesus, but they could not even ask him, bro, are you Jesus? But because, you know, he looked completely different. It was like a completely different person, right? He just had a different body, right? And there was another point where there were some two guys that were like walking down the road and again, he had like changed his body again. And it was like, oh, and those guys did not know it was until they had communion together. They were like, oh, fuck, that was Jesus, right? Because it didn't look like the normal Jesus. He had changed his body again, right? So essentially what is happening in the background is like, he was transferring his consciousness into this like different bodies-ish, right? Right? Which essentially is what possession is, right? Okay, cool. So if you look at if you look at possession in the Bible again, right, you always find that anytime there's like any instance of possession, right, there's always, for some weird reason, water is always involved too. Do you understand? So a classic example would be, there's this guy that has the highest case of possession in the Bible. Like, he's the number one most possessed motherfucker in the Bible, right? He's this guy that said, Jesus was like, what is your name? He was like, hey, I am Legion, we are many, which means that, like, at least he had 6,000 demons inside of him, right? And Jesus was like, okay. And then demons were like, hey, Jesus, please don't send us to the abyss. And Jesus was like, okay, what do you want me to do for you? They're like, oh, send us into those pigs. And Jesus was like, okay. Again, possession, right? So Jesus was like, okay, cool. So those demons, they transferred their consciousness from that guy into those pigs, right? Into a herd of pigs. And those pigs ran inside. Where did they run? So they run inside the city. No, for some weird reason, they ran inside water. They went inside water again, right? So you see this instance of possession, and then you see water immediately, consciousness, water. And then again, you see things like in the Bible. There are all these concepts like baptism, right? Where, for instance, Jesus himself, right? Which is a form of possession, but which is just like a purest form of possession, right? You're being possessed by the Spirit of God, right? Okay, cool. So Jesus was like being baptized by John with water. And then when he was being baptized, there was like the Holy Spirit like descended on him, right? Like a dove. But again, the common culprit here is like, against what? Is water. Right. So on one hand, right, you have water somewhat always present with, number one, from, again, like I said, pyramid of like intelligence. The more water content you have, for some very weird reason, the more intelligent you have, which you are essentially. Man, elephants, all these beings on top of the pyramid have a lot of water inside of them. And you keep looking at animals with that. If you want to group their intelligence, you just notice that the animals that have like, if you scale it down, essentially, you just discover that the least water that the animals have, least water content they have, the less intelligence they get. They have, till you start getting to things like stone that don't have any water at all. And they don't have any intelligence. They don't have any consciousness. They have zero awareness. So on one hand, water is incorrect. There's water directly, biologically, and somehow correlated with intelligence and consciousness, right? And then number two, there's all these flood myths and flood stories around the world, right? Jesus, the one of Noah, Hudna Pishtin, all these things, right? And then you see, which is also a story of mortality, right? Which the whole Hudna Pishtin, Gilgal, that whole thing, right? That whole story, right? Was a story about like water. Okay, so let me just tell the story, right? So in the Bible, there's this whole story about Noah, right? Noah and the flood, right? There's a flood story in the Bible. But there's also like the Sumerians also had like a flood story, right? And the flood story of the Sumerians was kind of like very, very similar to the Noah story, right? But there was this guy called Gilgal that lost his best friend. And then he went to meet Utnapishtim, which was like Noah, the Noah of that time, right? The guy that survived the flood, right? And then he asked him for immortality, right? And then Utnapishtim was like, oh, okay, it's not hard. So he gave him this leaf, right? And then he gave Gilgal this leaf of immortality, essentially. And then Gilgal took that leaf, and then he puts the leaf down, and he went to bath inside the water. Again, you see water here again. He went to bath inside the water. While he was taking a bath in the water, right, the snake came up and took the leaf, swallowed the leaf, and when he came back, there was no leaf again, right? But the correlation here is water, right? For like that whole story again is submerged with water, right? So, and this is like everywhere, even like the Yangtze, Emperor Dario of the Shiite dynasty, like everywhere you see like anything that has to do with like intelligence or consciousness or mortality, the next thing that comes after is just water is just always inside the conversation somehow. Even when you are talking about like the highest form of spirituality, like, you know, you want to take it from a theological standpoint, right? If you want to look at it from, I'm just trying to say, if you want to look at it from like a purely scientific standpoint, right? There's a correlation there with water. Maybe it's weak, but it's there. If you want to look at it from like a biblical standpoint, there's that correlation there too with water, right? metaphysics to water, right? And if you want to take it from like a mythological standpoint, water just always happens to be like, always plays this like, it's just always in the mix in all the stories somehow. So comes back to the question, right? Like, oh wow, Jesus. How do you like increase like life expectancy, right? How do you increase life expectancy? Well, I wouldn't know, right? But I would guess it would have something to do with water, and not just like, I don't think it's something that has to do with like the amount of food you eat, the kind of food I think those things play a big role into it. But I think if the planet we are living on is like 75% water, right? I think if we can somehow modify the water that is in the planet, right, we can generally just raise like the life expectancy for everybody. Do you understand? I think what God tampered with Noah was water. It was just water. It was just like, you know what? I'll just fuck the water up for them. And then he fucked the water up. And then boom, we were just fucked up like that. Right? Yeah. And also this thing with AI, right? And why we don't have like really sentient AI. And okay, sorry, I wanted to touch on the idea of possession, right? Transferring your, like I said, like for human beings, like, because it's not everybody that like actually even likes their body. Let's start with that. There's people that don't even like their body, right? Everybody has something about their body they don't like. Yeah. Okay, cool. So for some people, like living like 300, 400 years in the same body is like they can't even imagine it. Like, why would you want to even do something like that? Do you understand? But they wouldn't mind like living like, I don't know, 100 years in their body, like switching to another body, and then switching to like, if you could like switch bodies around. Yeah, do you understand? Now the closest thing we can, which is the idea of possession, right? Which is what you see all these demons doing, right? They are disembodied beings, right? They possess people, right? They possess this guy, they are living in this body. Jesus is like, when a demon possesses somebody and you chase the demon out, the demon is going to go away, and then he's going to go into the desert. And then if he comes back to check if this former home is clean and swept, he's going to go and bring like 7 more demons. And those 7 more demons are going to come back and come and possess the person again. And it's going to be worse than it was in the beginning, right? So the demons essentially are using you as a host, right? They are these people that like, they are immortal essentially, right? They've achieved immortality when you want to think about it that way. But the way they are doing their immortality is by transferring their consciousness from one host to another, right? So they are using different hosts, right? So I think there are two parts to this whole divinity, to this whole immortality thing, right? If I was to guess, right? Like I said, this thing is beyond me. Like, Joseph was trying to tell me that day in the airport, explain everything to me, but again, my brain did not carry it. I'm sorry. I just don't have that level of intelligence, right? Okay, cool. So I think, but if I could distill the way my spirit can, the little my spirit could distill out of it, I think there are 2 ways around it, right? One way is like transferring of your consciousness up and down, right? Which is one way of achieving the immortality, right? And your consciousness essentially is just water. But we'll get to that point, right? Which is one way, right? Transferring your consciousness, which is what the demons do, and which is what the demons do, which is what the Holy Spirit did to Jesus, right? And then another thing with the water thing is that Jesus, right? Jesus was this guy that had like a lot of like miracles. He could do like all sorts of miracles. He was like super intelligent. He was super conscious. There was one time he didn't have any money, and he told them that he told Peter, I was like, just go and fish. Like the first fish you catch, like if you open his mouth, you find a coin. Like that level of consciousness, right? He told this Nathaniel, I think this was Nathaniel, I was like, I saw you sitting down under a tree. He just told him everything. He met another woman at the well, right? He was telling her that this is like the 5th husband. It was exhibiting like abnormal levels of consciousness, abnormal levels of intelligence, right? Abnormal levels of awareness, right? Right? Okay, cool. Right? Okay, cool. And then when he died, right? When they killed him, when they nailed him on the cross, right? They nailed him on the cross. One soldier was like, I think he got bored and he was like, you know what, let me just check what this Jesus guy is made of. And then he went to Jesus, right? And then he took his spear and then he pierced him on his side. And surprise, surprise, something came out. 2 things came out. Blood came out. Okay, check. Clap for yourself. And then water, a lot of water came out, which means Jesus had like an abnormally high level of water inside of him. Do you understand? Like, which kind of ties back into that whole pyramid of intelligence thing where the more water you have as like a species, as a your cells you can hold as a being, right? The more conscious you are, the more intelligent you are. So if Jesus was like the most intelligent person on this planet, right? You could assume that maybe his water content was like, maybe unlike me, that is like 75%, or humans are like 75%. Maybe his own was like 80 something, 85, 80 or 90 something percent, which would make sense. And if it was that high, right? Yeah, if they pierced him on the side, it would make sense that the water will come out, blood will come out, but a lot of water will also come out, right? Because his water content was just extremely high. But that's not. But that's not the point we're making today, right? The point we're making today is I'm trying to wrap my head around. Like I said, those people was telling me a diapod that day, but my brain wasn't carrying it. It couldn't distill it properly. I'm sorry. So I think there are two ways around it. Number one, possession, jumping up and down from body host to host, and then the other thing is just like, which I think is a general thing for the whole of the earth, which is like increasing like, since the earth itself is like 75% water, just like increasing like the quality of like water on earth essentially, which would like tampering with the water essentially, which will like essentially help increase, just naturally increase, like, hey, see Doja Cat, she looks nice, which will essentially just naturally increase life expectancy for all of us, right? We don't have to pray, we don't have to fast, we don't have to subject ourselves to any like longevity regimens, anything, right? Okay, so let's try to explore the first one, which is like moving your consciousness up and down, right? Okay, cool. So we know that demons can move their consciousness from one person to another, right? We know that there's something called baptism, which is like the Holy Spirit, which is the Spirit of God possessing you, right? Now, for those people to be able to do that, right, to possess you, there's something called baptism, which is water. Water is involved, right? I've said that like 1,001 times, right? Oh, you're cool. So how can we also do that for like a mechanical standpoint? Is there something we can possess as human beings? Well, we have these things now called AI, right? We have all these robots, right? So it will make sense that, okay, maybe in the future, as a human being, maybe you would be able to like possess a robot, for instance, right? And you could like put your body in like, I don't know, put your body like to rest essentially, and then transfer your consciousness into like a robot, right? Or into like something like that, right? Okay, cool. And that would be nice, right? Okay, cool. So why can't I do that now, right? Well, first of all, what are the differences between me and a robot, right? Well, number one, my body is like, I don't know, 75% water, right? But the robots, their body is like 0% water. They're like stone essentially. They have zero water content, right? So I think the first step for that would be moving from like silicon-based like intelligence, which is what we have now, to what I'll call submissible intelligence. Do you understand? If we can have like silicon that is like in gel form essentially, I think that's the first. If we can have like transitions, like transistors in like in gel form. Do you understand? It doesn't have to be. If intelligence can, if like, God, I don't know how to explain it in English. If we can have liquid compute, if we can make compute liquid, if you will, essentially, right? I think that would be a first step, right? If we can have like liquid compute, right? Then to mean that, okay, me and the robot, for instance, it means that, okay, both of us were very, very close now. I'm 75% water, the robot too is like 75%, I don't know. Whatever gel that robot is made of, that of whatever compute gel that the robot is made of, right? Where so it will be easier for me to say, so we can start saying, okay, how can I like transfer my consciousness? Does my consciousness have anything to do with my blood? We can start like exploring that. We can start like playing with all sort of like experiments, metaphysical, everything, like just brute forcing the whole thing till we find a solution to it, right? And I think eventually we're able to do it because, again, like I said, possession is a thing. We know that people get possessed with demons. There's exorcism. There are all these things, right? You see people acting out of like, so we know those things are possible, right? It's just how can we do those things too, right? Okay, cool. So maybe we'll be able to transfer our consciousness. And then, okay, so that's one way. Again, like I said, my whole brain, so I don't understand this thing. I'm just jamming just. I'm just telling you like the things that, the correlations that. And then the other part that I touched on, which is like the desalination of the ocean and all this. I don't know myself. I don't know. I just say I should just like put it down because me too, I don't know. I don't fucking know. But I believe that like very, very soon we'll be able to like the whole idea of like aging and like I think all those things will be solved very soon. Do you understand? The whole idea of like aging will be like, and I think it's not even going to be very far. Like I think it's like we are like 3-4 years out of it. I'm just like very positive. Like inside my spirit, I just feel it's like highest 3 years, 4 years, right? This whole idea of aging, this whole idea of like increasing. And I think when I say aging, I don't mean like it will just be available for like a few like rich people. I mean like everybody, like that kind of. It sounds very kumbaya, very. But I think it's going to be very possible. But I think it's going to. But I think it has something to do with water. Honestly, I think if we can somehow like modify like most of the water on this planet, right? Because the planet is 75% of water essentially, right? So if you're trying to like up your life expectancy, maybe you should want to tamper with the water, which is like literally what the whole planet is made of. Do you understand? So if you can somehow modify the water, I don't know what we can add to it or remove from it or do to it, but if you can somehow like do something to the water, I think we will be able to increase like generally just increase life expectancy for everybody. Yeah, so that's it. I'll come back onto this thing in the future, but this is just me like emceeing some of the things that the Holy Spirit told me, and I've forgotten most of it. I think I wrote most of it down with ChatGPT. It was like very concise, very heavy. Can't remember. I'll find the thread with ChatGPT, but that's it. Let me watch the Met Gala.